12 money myths that are wasting your time and energy. So myth number one is that your coffee habit is ruining your chances of getting rich. This is the personal finance industry's favorite myth, which is that the money that we spend on coffee is going to add up to life-changing amounts when you consider that you could be investing that amount. And while multiples of small purchases can add up if you're doing it every single day, for the majority of people, they aren't doing it every single day. And instead, what most Americans should be focusing on is their fixed costs. Healthcare, housing, and education actually cost the average American family about 75% of their discretionary income as of the 2000s. Compare that to the 50% that it used to be back in the 1970s. Studies demonstrate that it's not the little luxuries that are actually going to impact our wealth in the long term, but instead the decisions that we make around big recurring expenses. So if you're looking to build wealth, don't sweat the small stuff and really just focus on the bigger picture moves that you can make. Now, one of the biggest picture items for most people actually has to do with debt, and that's the second myth of today's video, which is that all debt is bad. While owing money on certain things like a credit card payment or a car payment that you cannot afford is technically considered bad debt, there is such a thing as, quote, good debt. So the classic example of debt actually helping you in the future is, let's say you use debt to get a student loan to go get an advanced degree, like you want to become a doctor one day. The expectation is that someday your job as a doctor is going to pay you a really high salary, enough that you can pay off that debt and also help people along the way doing your occupation. In this case, the debt would be viewed as an investment, and eventually that debt is going to pay for itself and then some even more. So I would consider this good debt, and it's going to increase your wealth over time to take on certain debt that is actually good. So you always want to ask yourself when it comes to debt, is the amount of debt that I'm going to take on actually going to pay for itself in the future? And if the answer is yes, then it's probably good debt. Another common example is the home mortgage. Mortgage debt is usually considered good debt because you're building equity in your home, hopefully at a fixed interest rate. Your monthly payments could be hedged against economic conditions, as well as the fact that having a mortgage could actually leverage the money that you do have in order to increase your net worth. So let me illustrate this. Let's use a really simple example here. And let's say you buy a home for $100,000 and you put 20% down, or $20,000, and you take on an $80,000 mortgage. Over 5 years, your house goes up in value to $120,000, and then you sell it. You pay back the $80,000 mortgage, and then you have $40,000 left from the sale since you sold it for $120,000. Since you originally invested $20,000, effectively you've made an extra $20,000 now after 5 years, which is a 100% return on your money. So not all debt is bad per se. However, we still want to keep track of the types of debt we are taking on. And if we do take on debt, we want to make sure we're able to repay it responsibly, as well as it's probably serving us at some point in the future. All right, so while buying a house or getting some real estate is one path to wealth, one path to wealth that is a money myth is that you need a financial advisor in order to become wealthy. A lot of people think that you need a financial advisor in order to invest properly, but in actuality, that's not the reason why you would even get a financial advisor in the first place. Since I used to be a financial advisor, I would say the biggest value that a financial advisor can offer you is that if you're about to enter a phase in your life where it's going to be a lot more complicated financially and you just need an overall strategy for your life, that means you probably need some type of service like estate planning, financial planning for your kids and your family, as well as perhaps some tax planning, etc. But if you're looking to get a financial advisor for the sole reason of getting you investment returns, it's probably not the best idea, because most financial advisors will just put you in some sort of standardized product that their brokerage or their firm that they're working for approves of, and those rarely beat the S&P 500 anyways. If you are going to go with a financial advisor, you want to make sure that they are at least classified as a fiduciary, which means they have a legal obligation to give you the best financial advice possible, even if that means they make less money. That's the one thing you want to pay attention to when it comes to financial advisors. You want to figure out how are they incentivized and compensated. So in many cases, financial advisors are compensated by putting you in certain mutual funds, and those mutual funds will pay them up front. If you ever do see any evidence of this, you might want to steer clear of that particular advisor. All right, money myth number 4 is that in order to invest, you need to track the market daily. And I feel like a lot of beginners might get intimidated by the stock market because there's a lot to keep track of in terms of companies and financial metrics. But this couldn't be further from the truth. The best investors are the ones that can endure for a really long time, and hopefully they're the ones that just forget their brokerage password and never check it. The idea here is that if you're investing in an index fund, which is just a fund that owns 500 or even thousands of multiple different stocks, you're basically investing in the future of the entire stock market. So the best thing for you is just to not touch it and get emotional whenever the market goes up and down, because the market is typically proven to go up in terms of an average return of around 8% per year since the inception of the stock market ever started back in the 1920s. Successful investing is pretty boring in general. You usually want to pick a few value funds and consistently invest into them, and hopefully you never check them until you need to retire and actually withdraw that money. All you really need to do when it comes to investing is you want to set up your goals, you want to figure out what your time horizon is and what your risk tolerance is when it comes to investing in these certain types of funds that you might choose. If you are interested on how to build a portfolio or investing for beginners, I will leave some links for you guys down in the description below. Money myth number 5 is that if you are young, you don't need to invest. So let me debunk this myth for you guys right now. One of the most important lessons that I can pass on to you, especially if you're watching this and you are young, so perhaps before the age of 30, is that time is on your side and compound interest is one of the best things that you can take advantage of. A lot of young people think that when they're young, they don't need to invest. And I actually did a guest teaching role over the summer for just one high school class in particular. And a lot of the kids in there think that they didn't need to invest, and that was more reserved for their parents or when they became older, like over the age of 40. Their rationale was because retirement was so far away that they just didn't need to think about it at this moment. But if you watch this channel, you should know that even a 10-year head start compared to your peers can actually make you a ton of money in the future. All right, so let's look at a really good example right here. We have two investors, investor A versus investor B. So investor A in this case would start saving at the age of 20 and starts to invest, and they save or invest $2,400 a year for the next 10 years. Investor B, on the other hand, they enjoy his or her life until the age of 30, so they start 10 years later, but then they start to invest $2,400 a year for the next 35 years. Let's assume an 8% stock market return for both of them here, and you can see that by starting 10 years earlier, investor A will end up with over $150,000 more than investor B by the time they're both 65. But what's even crazier about this is that investor A stopped contributing at the age of 30. So they just invested for 10 years and that's it. That means investor B kept contributing $2,400 a year for 35 years and still came out behind because of the 10-year lag in when they started. So the opposite of this myth should be true, which is the younger you are, the more you should be thinking about investing today. Contrast that to the other opposite end of the spectrum, which is that many older people think that it's too late for them to get started with investing, and that's actually money myth number 6 today. In a recent study, 47% of all respondents thought you could be too old to start saving and investing for retirement, but I wholeheartedly disagree. Even if you're in your 40s, your 50s, or 60s, that could still mean between 10 to 30 years of investing that you have for the rest of your life. And the youngest you will get is today years old, so if you're the age of 50 right now, it's at least better to get started than if you were the age of 70, and if you were the age of 70, it's better to get started now than if you were the age of, say, 80. We need to basically stop thinking about the past. I know it's a little bit cliche, but we need to live in the present. And as long as you're still alive, it's still a really good time to get started with investing. It's never too late. Myth number 7 is thinking that you don't need to subscribe to this YouTube channel in order to get better with your personal finances. We should probably debunk that myth and just have you subscribe right now. All right, that wasn't the real money myth number 7, but you should still subscribe. And the real money myth number 7 in today's video is thinking to yourself that you need to hit a certain number before doing something. You'll hear this a lot from your coworkers, your friends, your families. They say something along the lines of, once I make 6 figures, then I'm gonna take a vacation. It usually comes in the format of, once I make X, then I will do Y. And the scariest one to me is, once I make a certain number, then I will be happy. But the myth I wanna bust here is that even when you do make X amount of money, sometimes Y seldomly even happens. There's a psychological reason for this. It's actually called hedonic adaptation, which means that humans have a tendency to return to their baseline happiness despite life's ups or downs. So once you hit, say, $100,000 per year in salary, you might sit there and think to yourself, man, wouldn't it be really nice to hit 200K in salary? And then what happens when you hit 200K in salary? You want 300K in salary, and so on. It often looks like the following. You can see that our baseline happiness here in blue will always stay the same, and even as we're acquiring new things, we become happy for a short period of time. In this example, we get a new car, and boom, our happiness goes up. We're on a high for a while, but then after a few months or so, it becomes normal and we revert back to our normal baseline happiness. Then perhaps our car breaks down and we are in a low spot of our life, but eventually we'll return to our baseline happiness and so on. The point here is that we will always adapt to whatever circumstances are thrown at us. Instead of worrying about how much money you need in order to be happy, we should really be reflecting on the values and goals that will lead to a higher quality of life. And if you ever see an opportunity for that, just act on it. All right, the next myth is a little controversial one, at least for some people out there, and that is that all credit cards are bad. I covered this a little earlier, but credit card debt generally falls under bad debt. Yes, I definitely agree with that. However, there are some cases in which you can use a credit card work to your advantage and actually make money or make profit off of the credit card companies. If you're able to make your payments off in full at the end of every single month, then credit cards actually become a financial hack as long as you choose the right credit cards with the right rewards. So I personally have the Chase Sapphire Reserve card. It has a really high annual fee of around $550 per year. I think it might have even gone up this year to $595. However, I often spend enough on the card that I actually make up for the fee as well as get bonus points on top of that. So I definitely want to bust this myth, but please note it comes with a huge asterisk, which is that you need to be responsible. If you're not sure you can do that, you definitely want to stay away from credit cards. However, this is one of the myths that's really infuriating to me because the benefits, at least for me in my personal life, have far outweighed the negative stigma that the credit cards might have. Money myth number 9 is definitely a hot take. It's basically, if something costs more, then it must be of higher quality, right? I think as humans, we tend to get anchored to any type of data when it comes to a purchase decision, and oftentimes we only have the price to work off of, so we automatically think to ourselves, higher price equals higher quality. But this is something that most people probably fall for, and it's definitely not true. Just because something is of higher price doesn't mean it's higher quality, and vice versa. I'm sure you can think of some examples. So an example that I can think of is you go to a Michelin star restaurant and you drop $300 on some frou-frou gastronomic type of meal that doesn't even satiate you. At the end of that meal, guess what? You go to In-N-Out Burger and you get yourself an $8 burger that just fills you up and is exactly what you wanted. In both of these cases, food is being exchanged for money, and just because one is of a higher price doesn't mean that it's of value to you. Therefore, just because you see something that's more expensive, we should always be questioning the value that we're getting from that purchase. Now, speaking of purchases, money myth number 10 is that you need to buy a home at all costs, especially in America. After all, buying a home is the American dream, and it wouldn't be complete without a white picket fence. But these days, buying a home might not even make any financial sense anymore, especially in the environment that we're in, especially on the West and the East Coasts. When it comes to buying versus renting a home, you definitely need to run the numbers yourself, but oftentimes what we're seeing right now is that buying a home is almost double the price of just renting a similar home in the same area. The general rule of thumb is if you're looking to stay in a place for longer than say 5 to 8 years, then it might make more sense to build that equity in the home and actually settle down and buy that home. However, so many people are unable to afford a down payment these days, and at the end of the day, you're still forking over money in exchange for a service, and that service is that you get to live in a shelter of some kind. I think we're coming to a pretty pivotal moment in this generation, and the next generation might have to think about whether or not home ownership is actually something they want to pursue. So yeah, I think this is a myth that American society wants you to fall for this trap, which is like you need to buy a home at all costs. I'm not sure what it's like for other countries, so please let me know down below. The next two myths are about status and looking a certain style of way. So myth number 11 is that the rich always dress to impress and they live a lavish lifestyle. Personally, I think being rich isn't about what you wear or what type of car you drive. I just think it comes down to how much money do you have in the bank at the end of the day. Oftentimes in culture and social media, it's shown that the rich drive fancy cars, they go to these mansion parties, they're wearing designer clothes, etc. But in one of my videos, I said if someone was driving a Lamborghini or a Ferrari, you don't actually know how much they actually owe on that Ferrari or Lamborghini. For all you know, it could be 90% financed. The reality is that many of these wannabe rich people live a lifestyle that's way above their means, and they're basically leading you on with what they want you to perceive as a great life. The really rich and the real rich people, they actually live below their means, and they know that that's how they got there. They were frugal in the first place, they probably spent within their means, and they didn't go too crazy. That's evidenced by the fact that some of the richest people I know, they just wear t-shirts, they wear jeans, they wear just Nike shoes, and they drive Toyotas. So we want to make sure we're disassociating or basically decoupling the fact that living large is equal to rich. That's hardly the case at all. And the next money myth is that some people are just born with being good at money. That's actually not the case. I've definitely seen some TikToks where people are just saying, man, it must be nice to be good at money, and it feels like it's some genetic trait that some people have. In my opinion, no one is born good with money. I think it's something that's built up over time and something you have to work at consistently. If you do struggle to be good with money, there are 3 or 4 steps that you can take to guarantee that you're better with money by the end of this video. Number 1 is to start small. Perhaps that just means checking your bank account once a week and just being more aware of what money is coming in versus what money is going out. Number 2 is you could try a templated budget. So there's something called the 50-30-20 rule, which states that you should allocate 50% of your budget towards needs, 30% towards wants, and then 20% towards savings. You can start with this type of budget and try to make it easier for yourself, see if your finances fit into this budget, and then make adjustments along the way. The third step you can take in this video is just to talk about your finances with some friends and family. So just having having conversations about where your finances are at and where you want them to go, that could be a really big help to you. And number 4, you can continue learning about your finances by just learning about it online, reading publications like Wall Street Journal, maybe CNBC, maybe just watching a few more YouTube channels on finance. All right, that's the end of this video. If you really enjoyed this video, you might like this next video right here, which is the 10 purchases that have saved me time and money. If you're genuinely interested in some purchases that have saved time or money, you might want to check out that video. And thank you guys for being here. I'll see you guys in the next one. I hope you have a great day.